And it's our pleasure to welcome back from his holiday, and he'll be joining us Wednesdays here going forward through the summer. Former Vancouver Canuck and TSN hockey analyst, Mr. Frank Corrado. How you doing? How's your
I'm
summer?
good. Yeah, it's been good. It's nice to be back with you guys. Had a little time away, a little vacation, and now we're back in the swing of things. We had Hlinka-Gretzky kick off from the TSN studios and back up with you guys. So, yeah, it's nice to get the juices going again.
Indeed, my friend. We're going to ask you about the Vancouver Canucks, the Canadian 7 here, Elias Pettersson and Andrei Kuzmenko, in a second. But you were telling us there off air, Hlinka-Gretzky is kind of a tough tournament to broadcast because this is the first time where you really get to know these players. They don't have a lot of history going into this tournament, and yet still there are already some terrific draft prospects on this Canadian side, including an exceptional player, Michael Misa of Saginaw in the OHL, as well as a couple of right-shot defensemen, which could well be top 10 picks next year in the draft. Henry Muse and Zane Perek, two more OHLers.
Yeah, I mean, like Misa is every bit of the word exceptional. He's quite the talent, and for a young player to be doing what he's doing in that tournament and kind of leading the charge for that team, it's very impressive. And Zane Perek, like I remember my 16-year-old year being a defenseman in the OHL. It was basically survival. And he scored, I believe he scored 21 goals this year with Saginaw. I would be hard-pressed to think that I got more than 50 shots on net as a 16-year-old in like 60-something games. Like I know there were times where I left the rink as a 16-year-old, and I can honestly say I didn't need to tape my stick in between periods. I didn't touch the puck very much. So, a lot of talent on the Canadian side. We've been, myself and Victor Finley, we've been calling the U.S. games. And there's a player on that team by the name of Trevor Connolly, who's going to be going to Providence College in 2024. He plays for Tri-City in the USHL. Like I think that's a name people will be talking about maybe in the late first round, early second round when it comes draft time. He's quite the talented player, and he's very hardworking. Like he's got a motor that doesn't really stop. And for the U.S. team, as I'm sure people know, it's not the national team development program. This is not their. This tournament isn't part of their schedule, so it's a little bit of a best of the rest when it comes to the American players. And
no Cole Iserman, for instance.
No, exactly. No Cole Iserman. So there's, you don't have that. You'll see that in the spring, but this is the official opening, I guess, for all the scouts. So there isn't much of a history on these players, and if you're a player playing in this tournament, basically you want to put yourself on everyone's radar. So they're making as many trips as possible to come see you play throughout the course of the season. Now's the time to catch their eye.
It's too bad that the U.S. doesn't send the development team, because for the rest of the world, everybody's available. Like you could make this a full-on best on best, and the U.S. kind of ruins that a little bit.
Yeah, and it's weird because it's in the middle of the summer, because some teams chose to do an evaluation camp. The Canadians this year chose to just choose their team and bring the players that which I kind of agree with. Listen, to start having almost a week-long evaluation camp in the middle of the summer, there's players that have to get ready for seasons here. There's players coming off injuries. Like it almost seems just a little self-serving to have all these players come into a camp and then a bunch of guys not make the team. So I like the fact that Canada identified who they're going to take, and they're bringing those players in. And listen, if you're the Canadians, you have every great player at your disposal. But when it comes to the end of the season tournament, the Americans will have their best and Canada won't, because there'll be a lot of CHL players playing in the playoffs. So there's two opportunities there missed to have true best on best at the under 18 level.
Speaking of off-season training, have you caught Andrei Kuzmenko and his Rocky IV exploits training in Bali?
I did. Yeah, listen. You're going to go on vacation at points as a player, and you kind of have two options there. Are you going to not work out for the week that you're on vacation, or are you going to try and make do and get a workout in? So good for Kuzmenko for doing that. I can appreciate that. And I think people, if you're being critical of the fact that he's doing these weird workouts and he's in an obscure part of the world where hockey players don't train, listen, man, everyone's got to take a little time off for themselves. Like it is what it is. And I would say I kind of commend the fact that he's chosen to go there and continue his off-season training. I think there's there's something about certain players where it's like they'll take time off in the middle of the summer, or they'll get a couple days off from the gym in the middle of the summer, and they don't even want it. Like, they just want to keep that that momentum that they've had going in the gym and their training. And that's probably part of the program for Kuzmenko. Just keep things going, and there's a lot of creative ways you can do things nowadays.
How much does 1 week on the beach ruin what you are? Like, all these guys are fine-tuned machines. If you decide you're going to do 1 week of imbibing and the buffet in the morning and all the bacon, how much does that set you back? Does it hurt to get back on the bike, so to speak, a week later or 2 weeks later?
I think it maybe the first couple days you start to feel it. Maybe your conditioning goes a little bit, or some of your numbers. Like, I know there's a lot of guys where they're working out in the gym and they have a pen and paper and they're keeping track of all their numbers, right, week after week, to make sure things are going in the right direction. When you come back from something like that, you're not necessarily hitting the numbers that you may have been hitting the week before. But the great thing is, if you've laid so much foundation work properly leading up to that point, it doesn't take that long to get back into things. So a week off is actually not the worst thing in the world. And a lot of gyms, a lot of trainers actually do what's called a deload week in the middle of the summer. And they do it by design to basically give your body an opportunity to just kind of reset, recharge in the middle of the summer. And they'll full well know going into the next week that your conditioning might be a little behind, your numbers may not be as high, but then they see those numbers skyrocket in the following weeks because you were able to take that week off. So I think it's important for players to keep that in mind as well.
Calendars turn to August. When are you in ramp up mode? 2 weeks away, or how far away?
I think as soon as you see the calendar turn to August, then you start thinking, okay, like, I'm on the ice 3 to 4 days a week coming up here. Like, I look at it like August 1st hits and it's 6 weeks away. So you want to be on the ice a decent amount. You want to be getting your summer training into more of a like speed focused program, right? I think you do a lot of heavier lifting earlier on in the summer when you're not on the ice as much, because, if you're doing heavy lifting and then going on the ice, that's when you kind of risk that injury in the summer that we see guys get to. So you're almost transitioning away from the heavier weights, getting into your speed work now. And as that gets going, the weight is going to drop a little bit and you'll get on the ice a little bit more. But for me, I always like to be ready September 1st. And it just gave me a 2 week buffer to know that, okay, if I'm not feeling great, I have 2 weeks to get where I need to go. There's some players that'll kind of look at it and say, okay, the first week of August, I might still be on the ice 2-3 times a week. And as we go throughout, this month, it gets to 4 and 5. But pretty much as soon as you see that August 1st, flip over on the calendar, it's like summer's starting to get to an end here. And, it's like less afternoon golf rounds and more, I got to go from the gym to the ice, and then I got to go home and cook myself a good meal and get some rest, because, we're essentially 4 to 6 weeks away from wanting to be, at your physical peak.
Well, speaking of training camp, Frankie, and the outlook for the season, we're asking today on our Bodog poll question who you think the worst of the Canadian 7 teams will be this upcoming season. And we ask that in part because I think a lot of people are taking a new look at the Ottawa Senators and saying, that's a pretty good-looking team. Now, Montreal's been the worst of the Canadian 7 the last 2 seasons, and it was Vancouver before that. But you tell me, and of course Calgary and Winnipeg, we're still kind of waiting. Are they going to shuffle things around? But what do you make of the Canadian 7, and who do you think might struggle most this coming year?
For me, it's still the Montreal Canadiens, and there's just no expectation based on the roster that they have there that they're going to be a team competing for much in terms of a playoff spot. And there's still a lot of turnover that needs to happen in Montreal. Like, there's some contracts there that are going to expire at some point here, whether it's next summer or the summer after that. And I would imagine Kent Hughes is saying, okay, like, let's just get to the point where those contracts expire. Because they're too hard to move, and we're not in a position where we want to start throwing in sweeteners. So as long as you have that going on your team, it seems like it's difficult. Now, Vancouver's in a different position because Vancouver has a couple contracts that maybe you'd like to move on from, but Vancouver has a number 1 center, a number 1 defenseman, and a number 1 goalie, like true studs in the NHL, and you can build around that. And they have done a better job of building around that Like for me, the Canucks are a team that if everything goes well, they should be in the playoff mix, like within a few points. Like I would imagine, with the way the blue line can play out this year, a full year of Hronek if he stays healthy, and Carson Soucy on the back end, like Ian Cole playing on your third pair. I like the way that blue line looks. I like the way the cap structure looks on that blue line. And, there was never a real issue as far as wingers go for the Vancouver Canucks. So if Rick Tocchet can have the team playing better defensively as 5-man units up and down the ice, and everyone stays healthy, like there's an opportunity for the Canucks to make the playoffs there. I don't see that for the Montreal Canadiens. For the Ottawa Senators, like the expectation is they're a playoff team and not just sneaking in. Like they absolutely should be a playoff team. And I think, Pierre Dorion took a risk with Alex DeBrincat, bringing him in. It didn't work out, but essentially he's found a way to turn DeBrincat into Kubalik, who has the potential to play in the top 6, but he's a top 9 guy who has been productive. And, if you've watched him play ever, you can be a fan of the way he plays. He plays a hard game. He's a great skater, and he's a busy kind of player. They bring in Tarasenko, who can replace some of the goals that you lose in DeBrincat. They bring in a young prospect. That's not going to matter. But, in the grand scheme of things, like, it's a nice piece to have. A healthy Josh Norris is going to go a long way. Like I'm a believer in his. I think he's an outstanding player, and if he stays healthy, he'll have an opportunity to show that. And they rebuilt their blue line, so there's no reason why the Ottawa Senators should be anywhere near the bottom of the standings. Just going through the other Canadian teams real quickly. Toronto's going to be a good team. Edmonton's going to be a good team. How can you not with the players that they have signed up front? Winnipeg Jets. I think that's a slam dunk, the trade that they make for Dubois to bring in Velarde and Iafallo. And not only are they players that you're going to have under contract and cost controlled for a little while, they're actually good players who can help you now that are young. So that's great. And then when it comes to Calgary, like if Jonathan Huberdeau is an 80-point player again, if Nazem Kadri has a good bounce back year, and the biggest one of all, Jacob Markstrom, like if he plays like a $6 million goalie, that's a team that should be in the playoff mix as well. So, you go through the list, there's 6 Canadian teams that should be, in the playoff mix. And there's one team that they don't have the expectations to be, nor should they with what, kind of roster overhaul they need to go through.
Is there a risk that the Flames just circle the drain? I mean, I know the GM and the coach are gone. The environment should be wholly different, especially with guys that you'd think would be very player-friendly and Conroy and Iginla around them. But it still seems like guys want out to some degree and are promising to not resign. Like, I just wonder if there's still just dissatisfaction and discontent there in the room that will dog them all season long.
Not to mention potentially more shoes to drop here trade-wise with some of these UFA and RFAs to be.
Well, exactly, right? It's going to be difficult. One of the big challenges for them is going to be getting everyone on the same page and buying in early on. Just because that, okay, Elias Lindholm hasn't re-signed. The team would like to. They haven't done it yet. Michael Backlund essentially doesn't want to be there in the long term. Noah Hannafin essentially doesn't want to be there in the long term. But, like that can't turn into an attitude thing in the room where it's like, I don't even want to be here. Or I don't like, if you're a player that's signed there with some term, it'd be very advantageous to walk into that room and find ways to get everyone together and on the same page and everyone believing in the program right now, because they kind of got what they wanted. Like Daryl Sutter is not there anymore, so it's going to be a different approach, and that should help a player like Jonathan Huberdeau, who he needs to live up to $10.5 million. That's a big contract, and he needs to be that player. He doesn't need to be 115 points, but man, like you need to lead the way for that team and be part of the solution. And, the circumstances should fit with Jonathan Huberdeau in the way it went last year with Daryl Sutter.
Lastly, Frankie, Sven Baertschi, our old friend, announced his retirement today, only 30 years old. He was in the Swiss League last year, but of course you overlapped with him in Vancouver and in Utica. Tell us about the guy and why you think it didn't work out better for him here in Vancouver.
Well, first of all, I'm sorry to hear that, and I know he had concussion issues along the way, but he was such a skilled, talented player. And I remember when we made the trade for Baertschi and we knew we were going to get him in Utica for that playoff run, it was like he brought our team to life. He really did. Like, we brought in Baertschi, we brought in Corey Conacher, and all of a sudden our team had this different look to it, and we were dynamic, and we had these playmakers, and we had guys who could finish. And Baertschi was that for our team. He played on the top line right away. He scored so many important goals throughout the course of that playoff run. And he was just such a nice guy to be around. A great addition to our locker room that had a lot of like high character guys to begin with, and he fit in so well. But as far as our team's game on the ice, we needed that dynamic element, and it was just like, as he fit in so well, and he came into that group, and it just came to life, and it was it's unfortunate that his career is ending, and a player that was drafted high and had high expectations. Listen, you get to the NHL, he lived out his dream. Not every, NHL career is built the same, but, I'm sure there's some great moments along the way. And if anyone, anyone that played on our team in Utica, when we brought him in, they could tell you that, him coming in that room just changed the way our team looked, changed our outlook on games. And we kind of had this team where we knew that, no matter what kind of game we were going to play, we could win that game. And if we didn't have Baertschi, we wouldn't have been that team. So he was a massive piece for us.
Yeah, he was languishing a bit in Calgary. He came on over. He was a point per game for you guys in 15 games down the regular season, and then 8 goals in 21 games on your run there to the Calder Cup finals. And, of course, you were on that team. Jacob Markstrom, the aforementioned, on that team, and a whole bunch of guys that we would come to know as Vancouver Canucks. Frankie, marvelous stuff. Thank you for this. Welcome back, North America side, and we'll catch up next Wednesday.
Thanks, guys.
Tackle all the hills with ease and don't arrive at work all sweaty. Get around the city on electric transportation that fits your lifestyle and get it at bestbuy.ca.